Imagine spending $80,000 on a dress for a funeral, and then that dress becomes the centerpiece of an elaborate revenge plot that no one saw coming. This isn't just about a dress. It's about a betrayal so profound, it demanded an equally outrageous payback. Let me take you back to a small town in Ohio, where the air smells like fresh-cut grass in the summer, and everybody knows your business, whether you like it or not. This is the story of how a single dress turned a family funeral into a saga of grief, judgment, and ultimately sweet, sweet vindication. It all started in the fall of 2023, in a little brick house on Maple Street, where my grandma, Evelyn, took her last breath. She was the kind of woman who'd bake you blueberry muffins just because it was Tuesday, but also the kind who'd give you a side-eye if you didn't wipe your shoes on the mat. Grandma Evelyn was the glue of our family, the one who hosted Sunday dinners with pot roast so tender it fell apart with a glance. When she got sick, it hit us like a freight train. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, the doctor said. She made it 7, because that's just how stubborn she was. In those final weeks, as we sat by her bedside, she grabbed my hand, her grip still surprisingly strong, and said, "Maggie, when I'm gone, I want you to bury me in my most expensive dress. Promise me." Her voice was soft, but firm, like she'd already made up her mind. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, thinking it was just one of those quirky requests old folks make when they're staring down the end. I mean, Grandma loved her clothes. Her closet was a time capsule of floral blouses and church hats, but most expensive. That threw me. After she passed, the family gathered in her living room, surrounded by her knickknacks and the faint smell of her lavender perfume. That's when the drama started. My cousin Brenda, with her designer purses and her "I'm better than you" smirk, decided to take charge. "Maggie, you heard what Aunt Evelyn said. You're in charge of the dress, so don't mess this up." Her tone was sharp, like she was already judging me for something I hadn't even done yet. The rest of the family chimed in, arguing over what expensive meant. Was it the dress she wore to my cousin's wedding? The one she bought for that cruise in '98? Nobody could agree, and every suggestion felt like a jab at someone else's taste. I felt like I was drowning. Grandma's wish was simple, but it was tearing us apart. I spent days digging through her closet, holding up dresses that smelled like her, trying to figure out which one she meant. Nothing felt right. The silk gown from her 50th anniversary was beautiful, but worn at the seams. The red velvet dress she loved was too flashy for a funeral. I was starting to panic. I couldn't let her down, not after she trusted me with this. One rainy afternoon, I drove to an antique shop in Columbus, about an hour from home. It was one of those places with creaky floors and glass cases full of old jewelry and faded postcards. Grandma used to drag me to shops like this when I was a kid, teaching me how to spot a treasure among the junk. I wasn't expecting much, but as I wandered through the aisles, I saw it. A dress hanging on a mannequin in the corner. It was simple, almost plain, a cream-colored gown with delicate lace sleeves and a high neckline. It looked like something Grandma would have worn to church, understated but elegant. It screamed her. I asked the shop owner about it, a sweet old man named Mr. Hargrove with glasses perched on his nose. "Oh, that's a special piece," he said, his eyes lighting up. "Vintage, early 1900s. Belonged to a silent film actress, they say. One of a kind." I ran my fingers over the fabric, feeling a lump in my throat. This was it. This was the dress Grandma would have chosen. Then came the moment of truth. "How much?" I asked, bracing myself for a few $100, maybe 1,000. Mr. Hargrove adjusted his glasses and said, $80,000. I nearly dropped my phone. $80,000 for a dress that looked like it could have come from a thrift store rack. My heart was pounding. I thought he was joking, but his face was dead serious. Apparently, the dress was part of a rare collection, authenticated by some fancy museum folks. The price wasn't just about the fabric. It was about history, rarity, the whole shebang. I drove home in a daze, the rain smacking my windshield like it was mad at me. $80,000. I didn't have that kind of money. I worked as a high school English teacher, for crying out loud. My savings account was more like a hope for the best fund. But Grandma's words kept echoing in my head. My most expensive dress. This had to be it. It felt like a sign. So I did the unthinkable. I took out a loan, cashed in some savings, and went back to that shop. I bought the dress. My hands were shaking as I signed the papers, but I kept telling myself it was for her. For Grandma. The day of the funeral was crisp and gray. The kind of October day where the leaves crunch under your feet and the air feels heavy with goodbye. The church was packed, neighbors, cousins, old friends from Grandma's book club. I'd spent hours preparing, making sure every detail was perfect. The dress was laid out carefully, and Grandma looked peaceful, almost like she was just napping. The sight of her in that gown brought tears to my eyes. It was worth it, I told myself. Worth every penny. But then the whispers started. As people filed past the casket, I heard them. Who spends that much on a funeral dress? It's disrespectful, showing off like that. Evelyn wouldn't have wanted this. My cheeks burned. I wanted to scream that this was what she asked for, that I was honoring her wish. But I just stood there, clutching my purse like a lifeline. Then Brenda took it to a whole new level. During the reception, in front of everyone, our aunts, uncles, even the pastor, she cornered me by the coffee urn. "Maggie, what were you thinking?" she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That dress is a disgrace. You're making a mockery of Aunt Evelyn's memory, throwing money around like some wannabe socialite." The room went silent. I felt like I'd been slapped. My throat tightened, and all I could do was mumble something about it being Grandma's wish before I bolted to the bathroom, locking myself in a stall to cry. I'd never felt so small, so misunderstood. I kept replaying her words, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd misread Grandma's request. Maybe I was selfish, trying to prove something. The rest of the day was a blur of forced smiles and condolences, but inside I was breaking. Weeks passed, and I was still reeling. The loan payments were looming, and I was dodging Brenda's calls. Then, one morning, a letter arrived from Grandma's lawyer. I figured it was just some estate paperwork, but when I opened it, my jaw dropped. It was a detailed clause from Grandma's will, one nobody had mentioned before. Apparently, that cheap dress wasn't just a dress. It was part of a collection owned by a famous heiress from the early 20th century, and Grandma had inherited it decades ago. The dress itself wasn't the point, it was a key. See, Grandma had set up her will with a twist. The dress's value was tied to a trust fund, one that would only be distributed if her most expensive dress was used at her funeral. If it wasn't, the money would go to a distant cousin nobody liked. The catch: the dress's true worth wasn't in its price tag, it was in its historical significance, verified by a museum. Grandma knew the family would fight over it, knew they'd judge whoever took on the task. She planned it all down to the last stitch. And here, where it gets wild, Brenda's public outburst at the funeral. It triggered another clause. The will stated that anyone who slandered the executor of the dress request, me, would forfeit a chunk of their inheritance. Grandma had known Brenda's true colors, her tendency to tear others down to lift herself up. This was her way of making sure the truth came out. A few weeks later, we gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Brenda strutted in, all confidence, probably expecting a big payout. When the lawyer read the clause about the dress and her forfeiture, her face turned the color of sour milk. The trust fund worth over $1 million was split among the rest of us, with a hefty portion going to me for honoring Grandma's wish. Brenda got a fraction of what she expected, barely enough to cover her fancy car payments. I didn't say a word as we left the office. I didn't need to. The look on Brenda's face was enough. For the first time in months, I felt light, like I could breathe again. The dress, which everyone had mocked as a waste, had become a symbol of Grandma's genius. She turned her death into a lesson, a way to expose who really cared about her legacy and who was just chasing dollar signs. As I drove home, past the cornfields and strip malls of our little town, I thought about Grandma's smile, the one she'd flash when she knew she outsmarted someone. That dress wasn't just fabric and lace. It was her final act of love, her way of protecting me and teaching the family a lesson they'd never forget. So, here's what I learned from all this. Sometimes, the things that seem crazy, the things people judge you for, are the things that matter most. Grandma's request wasn't about vanity or money. It was about trust, about believing in someone enough to carry out your wishes, no matter how wild they seem. I spent $80,000 on a dress, and yeah, it nearly broke me. But it also showed me who I am, what I'm capable of when it comes to love and loyalty. If you're facing your own impossible choice, maybe it's not about a dress or a funeral, but something else that feels too big to handle. Listen to your heart. Trust the people who have always had your back. And don't be afraid to go all in, even if the world thinks you're nuts. Because sometimes, the most expensive thing you can do is also the most priceless.